My name is Sebastian Edwards. I am a professor here at Anderson, and I am the faculty director of the Center for Global Management. And this is our first global policy forum of this year. And we are very proud and very happy to have Professor Ed Leamer and Stephen Chung to talk to us. So let me explain what we try to do here, which it's a format that has been evolving through time and has gotten completely out of control, from my control, that is. And now it's under Lucy Allard's control, as most things. So the idea is that we have one or two or three speakers on a given topic, and the speakers say a few words before dinner. We're going to give each of them about 15 minutes. And then after the presentations, they pose questions to the tables. And the idea is that, and I hope that this does happen, the table discusses the questions that are posed by the speakers and come to some kind of conclusion about those questions. We try to intermingle students from the law school and students from Anderson so that the conversation can be sort of broad and across disciplines. And at the end, towards dessert, what we do is that we come back and then we choose randomly a few tables and ask the table to give us the conclusion and the answers that the table has come up with respect to the questions posed after the talk. One more thing that we do, although it's a little, I'll see how it goes depending on the time, we are going to open up for a few questions from you guys after the speakers and before dinner. But at the end, we pick some tables, you give us your answers, and we don't comment on the answers. We try to say final words by a few tables. Okay, so the topic today is trade wars and the impact on the United States and California. And I don't want to spend a lot of time introducing the speakers. They are on the internet. But let me say that Ed Leamer is a professor here, extremely distinguished. He hired me to come to UCLA, so that's a great accomplishment. And we went to Game 5 of the World Series, and we were disappointed. We paid too much for the ticket, didn't we? Yeah. In retrospect, we paid way too much for the tickets, but we had a great time. Okay, and Steve Chung is a double graduate from UCLA. He doesn't have PowerPoint for this discussion, which makes him very special. And he is the president of the World Trade Center in Los Angeles, which, as you know, has a fantastic program and puts together all sorts of very great events throughout the year. So let me ask you to give them a welcome and a round of applause, and then we'll just go to Ed Leamer.
I want to talk about the trade wars. The big driver of the trade wars is what I call the inverted upside-down V in manufacturing. This is an image that shows you manufacturing jobs, which rose from their relatively low level in 1946 up to a peak in around 1980, and since then they've been on the decline. The reason that we have Donald Trump for president is exactly captured by this image, because we built the middle class in the factories of America, and those factories are more or less disappeared. There's a very small fraction of the workforce that now is still in the manufacturing sector. And those two big dips there at the right, that happens to be coincident with the surge in imports from China. So there's a tendency to kind of blame it all on China. But you look at the trade dependence, that's imports relative to GDP. They were relatively low level at 3 or 4% back in 1950, and they were rising until around 1960, but they'd taken off very substantially after around 1960 or 1970. You can see that that's exports. In that image, you see the rise in trade dependence, much more global competition and contestability, but you also see a widening deficit. And as you know, Donald Trump is really focused almost 100% on the deficit, not the contestability that's represented by imports and exports, but by the difference. But you can see trade is surely a contributor to that decline in manufacturing jobs. The question really is how much. And if you look at this image, this shows you the fraction of manufacturing jobs relative to the total jobs in the United States. There's no V here. It's been in a constant straight line decline since 1950. So it seems inappropriate, if you look at this image, to blame it on the recent rise of China, because the decline in the manufacturing job is as a share of the workforce, is a symptom of the whole second half of the 20th century. It may be pushed or accelerated a little bit by the Chinese imports, but it's a fact of American life. And some of it has to do with globalization, but absent globalization, you would not have a huge manufacturing sector, at least in my opinion. It's mostly technological improvements, productivity improvements that'll let the few to do the work of many. So here's the questions that you might like to have answered quickly. What benefits come from international exchange of goods and services? What are the adverse effects of that exchange? What are the appropriate policy responses for the adverse effects of trade? What's unfair trade? How can we protect U.S. intellectual property? What policy responses are appropriate for dealing with overall imbalances, imports more than exports, which is the Trump focus? What policy responses are appropriate for dealing with bilateral balances, which are actually the Trump focus too, which is he's focusing only on the bilateral balance with China. What are the consequences of targeting selected countries, which is what our tariffs are doing, targeting China in particular? Where was American middle class built in the 20th century? I kind of gave you the answer to that already. Where is the middle class built now? To anticipate the answer, it's not being built anymore. So we have this highly bifurcated economy, and you graduate with a high school degree. You used to have a good middle class job in manufacturing. That's part of our past. So that's a reason that we're having this bifurcated job market, but then there's also the computer and personal digital assistance and artificial intelligence. That's also contributing to the income inequality in the United States. And it's very hard to name a country that, in fact, you can't name one that has extreme income inequality that still has a democracy. So our democracy is under siege from the basic economy, is what I would say. What allows the America First agenda that was not an option after World War II? Is our democracy a thing of the past? That's the final question I want to answer. I'm not going to answer it, but I pose it today. So I thought rather than talking about all technical economics, I'd talk about my vacation in Norway. This is an image of the Norwegian hills or mountains between Oslo and Bergen, about in the center of the north of Oslo. And then we were moving from Oslo to Bergen. This is Bergen, which is on the west coast, a port city. This is looking from the top, looking down at the port city. And inside of Bergen, I discovered, much to my great interest, Brygge was the home of the Hanseatic traders. These were the Hansa Germans who were middlemen trading products between Norway and Germany. And they had their own little home, their own location. They had places that they lived in this little town and where they worked. It was all totally isolated. And the critical thing is here we see Bergen in the middle of Norway. The fish were abundant in the north that the Norwegians could catch. And the rye was abundant in northern Germany. So what they did in Bergen is they traded rye for fish. And that was a tremendous benefit because there just wasn't enough bread in Norway and there was not enough fish in Germany to make everybody happy. So that exchange was an exchange that was hugely beneficial. So question one is, what benefits come from the international exchange of goods and services which are risked by a trade war? The answer is if you don't produce the same products, so one country does the fish, the other do the grain, it's a win-win situation. Everybody wins. And you start having a trade war, you lose those gains that come from trade. But there can be losers too. So this burst of well-being in Norway and Germany, that was great for the Norwegian fishermen who sold their product in Germany. and for the German farmers who could sell their product in Norway. But the other way around is not so good. The German fishermen had suddenly had all that great new competition, and the Norwegian farmers were losing also. So question 2, what are the adverse effects of international exchange of goods and services? The answer is trade between competitors. If you produce the same products, that creates winners and losers. The winners are the scarce factors that are able to enlarge their market and sell externally. The losers are the abundant factors that suddenly face more competition from foreign sources. So what does that mean in the U.S.? The concern is the U.S. has a scarce factor, which is unskilled labor compared to Asia. And as we trade more and more with Asia, they're the losers. But that's if you produce the same product mix. If you isolate your country from that competition, then you turn into partners in a win-win situation. That should be the goal of policymakers. Make sure that you have the assets, educational assets, infrastructure assets, that allow you to produce a product mix that is not emerging from these low-wage countries. Otherwise, you're going to import the products, but also the wages. But those who suffered, they complained about unfair trade. So it turned out that these ships were going back and forth between Norway and Germany. To load a ship with grain of a certain value, you had to fill the ship completely. But to load the equivalent amount in value of fish, you only had to fill it up half the way, because the fish per volume of cargo were a whole lot more valuable. So the competition, in order to do that transportation, because there's excess supply going from Norway to Germany, that drives down the price in Norway for shipping the product. And the German farmers complained this was unfair trade, because they had to pay high tariffs, high fees, in order to get their product to Norway, where the Norwegian fishermen could put it on these half-empty boats and get it there virtually for free. But famous German economist of the 18th century, Herr Edward Lerner, cautioned that the one who pays the tax is the one who desperately wants the exchange. So when you start imposing a tariff, you got to figure out whether you're going to pay it yourself. That depends upon how important the exchange is to you. So the Germans are keen to supplement their diets with fish, while the Norwegians don't care that much about it. It's the Germans who pay. So be careful what you mean when you say the word unfair, because unfair may be actually the other guy paying for that unfair price. That's elasticities that you learn in Sebastian's course. Hopefully. So it's good to have elastic demand, because then they can't tax you. You have alternatives, and you can just go away. This burst of prosperity supported new public support for the elderly. So back then, anybody over the age of 35 was considered old. So because they became so wealthy, they decided that they would provide free fish and free rye for everybody under the age of 35. But there's only so much fish and rye to go around. So how could the Norwegians do this? Well, the government had to borrow from the Germans. The Germans had to promise to cut back their consumption of fish and rye, to export more rye and to import less fish, so that the German government could take care of the elderly with that lavish support. And so there's an old guy in Norway getting a handout, and what you're supposed to be thinking about is Medicare and Social Security. Mm-hmm. So the message I'm trying to get across is our federal government is borrowing to take care of our elderly, borrowing from the Chinese, basically. So that's a homegrown problem. That has nothing to do with trade barriers or unfair trade. That's because you've given away too much and you don't have the savings domestically to justify that support. The solution to that is you've got to cut back Medicare and Social Security, or you have to have local taxes to pay for it. It should be a pay-as-you-go kind of system. So the Norwegian farmers rebelled because they were being left behind, and they supported the takeover of Norway by the Viking lord Donald, who promised to build a wall and limit the import of German grain. You're probably not aware of this part of history. And they were going to have the Germans pay for it. The Norwegian fishermen were okay with Vikings taking over because it's gone out all the time. But it looked like the Lord Donald had hired the Russians as mercenaries and dressed them as Vikings in order to take over the country. So that was annoying to those poor people. Donald didn't care, so in response for the support from Norwegian farmers, who were being hurt by trade apparently, he created a trade war with Germany, taxing the import of German grain, not realizing that who pays the taxes depends on the elasticities. So unfortunately, it was Norwegians who paid the fee because they were desperate to get the German grain, and that inelasticity made them be the ones who paid. So the deficit stayed exactly the same. Trump had all those taxes. There was absolutely no change in the deficit. It's true that the government had the tax revenue, but that was the main effect of those taxes. What's the policy response appropriate for dealing with overall imbalances when imports are more than exports? The answer is you got to have more national savings, none of these federal deficits. And you're all young. You don't realize how much fiscal child abuse is occurring in this country. Your future is being sold away. The infrastructure is terrible. The cost of college is so sky high. And in addition, the implicit tax rates in the future are terrible. There's at least $100 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities for Medicare. And that's on your balance sheet, not on mine. That's the problem you need to wake up to and start insisting that there's one of these political parties becomes the party of the young people of America rather than the old people. So here's the questions you might like to have answers. I've answered them. What benefits come from international exchange of goods and services? Material well-being for all if countries don't produce the same products, if they're partners, not competitors. That's the ideal outcome. What are the adverse effects? Well, if they're competitors from producing the same mix, there are winners and losers. The losers are the scarce factors, the factors that had scarcity rents before they opened up to trade, that face more competition globally because of that open trade. What's the best policy responses for the adverse effects of trade? You really want to isolate your country from foreign competition. In the United States, that means infrastructure investment, which we are way behind on, and we're in a global arms race when it comes to education. We should really have the best education in the globe. We might have that at the college and university level, but we don't at the high school level. And that's a big disaster for this country going forward, given the reality of both global trade and the technological forces that are changing the nature of the job market. And what's unfair trade? Well, I've already said the metaphor of unfair is rather misleading because it's pretty hard to tell exactly what is unfair. It depends on elasticities that most people are not aware of. How can we protect U.S. intellectual property? I'm not really sure. You know, the truth is, they used to talk about a technology gap. The United States had the most productive workforce in the globe, and they had better management, they had better technologies, they had better equipment. That's all gone now because so much of that has leaked abroad without compensation for the intellectual products that have been created here in the United States. And the U.S. basic comparative advantage is exactly in that stuff. That's what we supply the globe, is basically ideas. Unless we find some way to protect that, we're going to have that stolen away from us, and that's really what's going on. What policy responses are appropriate for dealing with overall imbalances? That's the federal budget balance. We need Americans to save more. We need people to save for their own retirement. I just retired today. You don't know that, but I have a defined benefit plan, and it's underwater, so the younger faculty are going to be paying for my retirement. So you can get yeah. You're not that young, though. More questions? What policy responses are appropriate for dealing with bilateral balances? Do nothing, silly child. You have a bilateral imbalance with your grocery store. You buy more than they buy from you. So don't focus on that. That's totally irrelevant. What are the consequences of tariffs targeting selected countries? This trade diversion. The supply chains around the globe are already responding, moving original locations away from China into other parts of other low-wage countries. So it's mostly diversion. It's not changing the basic fact. Where was American middle class built in the 20th century? In the factories of America? Where it's being built now? It's not being built. That's a crisis for this country, a huge political crisis going forward. That's something you're going to deal with. I'm surprised at how soon Trump and Bernie Sanders emerged on scene, but it's going to be part of your life to deal with that increasing inequality and the large fraction of people who are left behind, quite unlike the 20th century. What allows America First agenda that was not an option after World War II was the Soviet Union. A whole lot of our external political positioning relative to other countries was a Soviet Union containment strategy. And now we don't have the need to do that. And as a result, we have these inward-looking isolationist tariffs that are being imposed by Donald Trump. And then, is our democracy a thing of the past? I worry. I turn it over to Steve to answer all those questions.
Again, my name is Stephen Chung. I'm the president of the World Trade Center Los Angeles. And before I get started with talking about the issues, I got a couple questions earlier. What exactly is the World Trade Center LA? Are you a building? No. We're a nonprofit organization here in Los Angeles County, and we're part of the LA County Economic Development Corporation. So think of us as the international trade arm for LA County. Our mission is job creation. We want to create jobs here locally, and we want to create good jobs. And my focus is actually on international trade. So a lot of my work is helping international companies coming into Los Angeles region establish their operation so they can figure out how to get the permits, how to find the right partners, how to sell within this really complex system. Because when you look at Los Angeles, all these international corporations, they might be very successful in their own region. But when they come to LA, they don't know the difference between Pasadena, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Orange County. They don't know that there are different counties and different systems. So how do you exactly enter this market? So that's what we do to help them actually manage a system, connect them with the right folks, so if they're successful, then they create more jobs here locally. So that's I just want to give you a quick answer to that before I get started, because that's related to the day-to-day work I do and what I see. I'll try to answer some of those questions, which is really complex. But first, we need to do a little bit of a pivot away from Norway back to Los Angeles, all right? So I'm going to give you a bit of a LA 101 that you guys probably know, but you guys probably should use a little bit of a reminder. So later on when I talk about the international trade policies, it makes a bit more sense why we are interested in what we're interested in. So how many cities are in Los Angeles County? 88. How many square miles are in Greater Los Angeles region? What? 30,000. We go, so the 5-county region is what we know as Greater Los Angeles region, LA County, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Ventura. So when people come to Los Angeles, they don't know the boundaries. They don't care about the boundaries. They want to go to Disneyland, and we should empower them to do so. So and when they come here, they don't know the difference between, for example, the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, and most Angelinos don't know because they think, I know the port is the Port of Long Beach. It's the greatest port. It's the largest port. No, Port of Long Beach is the second largest port. Port of LA is the largest port. But because you guys drive by Long Beach and you guys don't go to San Pedro because it's all the way at the end of 110, you guys don't know it. That's why you guys don't talk about it. So with all that, I'm going to give you the quick context. LA County, 88 different cities, over 100 unincorporated region make up Los Angeles County. LA County's GDP last year reached a staggering $707 billion. Which means if we were a country, we would be the 19th largest economy in the world. And again, because we don't care about the boundaries, we're actually talking about the greater Los Angeles region. Our GDP is closer to $1.2 trillion, which makes us tied almost with Mexico as the 15th largest economy in the world. That's LA. LA, it's a massive country. It goes from the ocean all the way to Nevada and Arizona, from San Diego all the way up to Santa Barbara. That's our region. So scale it down a little bit. If you look at just LA City, the largest city in LA County, 4 million residents, right? You can fit 15 major metropolises inside LA City alone. So whether it's San Francisco, Boston, you put Manhattan, you put all of them in there. That's just LA City. Again, you add the 88 different cities. That's how big we are. That's how complex we are. And that's why we care about many different things, because our economy is not just Hollywood. And that's why I have to go around the world telling them LA is not just Hollywood. Entertainment is great, but entertainment is actually our third largest industry, not first. Trade and logistics is our number one. So the reason why we have that is because Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, the number 1 and number 2 container ports in North America, located right here in Los Angeles County. 43% of all ocean-going cargo coming into the United States come through this region. I'm going to say that again. LA controls 43% of ocean-going cargo coming into the United States. And so if you shut down the ports for just one day, about $2 billion worth of goods will not be entering the United States or exiting the United States, $2 billion. So that's why our effect is not just local, but it's through the entire nation. The other thing you have to think about international trade is not just the ocean-going cargo, air cargo. About $100 billion worth of goods come in and out of LAX alone every single year. Of course, LAX, when people think about it, it's just the passengers, right? Currently, we have about 85 million passengers coming through LAX every single year. We will reach 100 million passengers by the time the next Olympics arrive in LA at 2028, which we should be very excited for because that will bring additional revenue for the local region. So combined together between the Port of LA, Port of Long Beach, LAX, Port of Wainimi, a number of different port of entries around this region, the Los Angeles Customs District, our total trade last year reached $430 billion, making us the #1 customs district in the United States. And the largest trading partner is China, $170 billion in two-way trade with China. Number 2, Japan. Number 3, Korea. Mexico's not anywhere near close. Yeah, I'll explain that. So it's Korea, Japan, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Taiwan, Thailand, so on and so forth. So if you add up number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, you go all the way down to number 10, number 11, number 12, it doesn't equate the volume that we trade with China. Why should we care about a trade war with China? That's the reason. And because of that, this international trade, basically when it comes to imports and exports, it creates a lot of jobs here. Trade and logistics sector here in Los Angeles region, the Southern California region, is well over 528,000 jobs directly related to the trade and logistics sector. So the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach actually is one of the most important and strong economic engines in the entire region. So when we talk about trade, we don't just focus on imports exports. The other side is foreign direct investments. We have a lot of foreign companies coming here, investing here locally. A lot of people don't actually quantify that. So about 3 years ago when I joined the World Trade Center Los Angeles, one of the first things we did is we start quantifying the number of foreign firms located here in Southern California. I went to an event in Hanover, Germany once. It's the largest industrial trade show in the world called Hanover Messe. A lot of people go, a lot of Californians don't go because we don't know anything about manufacturing, right? So why should we go to Germany for the largest industrial trade show? What if I told you that LA is actually the #1 manufacturing center in the United States? Not Ohio, not Pennsylvania. LA has more manufacturing jobs than anywhere in the United States with over 350,000 manufacturing jobs right here. What do we produce? Airplane parts, auto parts, medical equipment, high-end denim. So if you're wearing those $600 jeans, it's actually manufactured right here, dyed right here, cut right here. So a lot of these different products are made right here that people don't know. So when we went to Germany, a lot of folks are saying, why on earth are you guys here? You guys have Hollywood and beaches and traffic and that's all you have. I'm working in Pennsylvania right now. And I told them, did you know that in LA region alone, in Southern California, we have over 800 German firms already located here? Your partners and your competitors are already here. They had no clue because next door, I remember this clearly, Indiana had a great map of all of the foreign firms located right in the state of Indiana, which little flags, cute little flags, and all 204 of them. Do you know how many foreign firms we have here in Southern California? Over 10,000. Imagine me putting that on the map. Sit down, Arizona. Sit down, Indiana. It doesn't compare, and this is the part where we are not taking advantage of our place, our rightful place. But this is a part where international trade we can't just take for granted. It's because when I went to Germany, we don't market ourselves. We don't tell our story. Other people are telling our stories. I went to Bogota one time, and I was there with a trade mission with about 20 LA companies. And the US Department of Commerce couldn't take us because they already overbooked. Every year, Florida, Governor Rick Scott and his 200 delegation go to Florida every year. And I went to meet with the Chamber of Commerce, and it's like, well, it's nice that you guys are here once every 6 years. But the Port of Los Angeles is important to us, but you guys are not anywhere close to being the largest port. Miami is. What? Like, what are you talking about? We have over close to 17 million TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, or 20-foot boxes, that are processed through the Los Angeles region, 43% that I was talking about. Miami has a fraction of that. It doesn't matter because they're just basically out advertising us. So this is the part where it makes a huge difference what we do internationally when it comes to advertising, marketing, and having those relationships. So I have 5 more minutes. So I talked about international trade when it comes to import, export, foreign direct investments. And by the way, those foreign firms, the 10,000 foreign firms, they hire directly over 427,000 employees right here in Southern California. That's the impact it has on us. So as we're moving forward, looking at some of the trade policies that are coming up, we've been talking with a lot of manufacturers, with a lot of logistic companies to see what that direct impact is. And right now, the economy is looking very rosy. Our stock market is still buoyant. Our ports, LA and Long Beach, had record numbers that we've never seen before, not even since the height of our economy back in 2006, 2007. And everybody's saying, what's to worry? And one of the things that they don't see is the pattern of what happens with imports, exports. A lot of times before Chinese New Year, there's an influx coming into the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach. What they want to do is beat the crunch, because once Chinese New Year comes in China, they shut down the operation for a full week because everybody goes back home, right? They shut down the factory. So in order for us to get the goods beforehand, they rush in so that they have an influx. So usually about January, February time, we see like a spike in the numbers. We saw that spike in about August, September in preparation because we knew the 10% tariff was going to be coming in with China. And a lot of that's going to be anticipated to come in January when the rest of the 25% will hit with the $250 billion trade tariff with China. So I'm hoping that I'm completely wrong. I'm hoping that I'm just paranoid. But this spike is not a good sign, in my opinion. I think in January, you're going to start seeing some trickling down effect in terms of our import-exports trade with China. And this is the part where it becomes even more complex because I think a lot of folks and manufacturers, we've been working with a local company that makes electric scooters. And they get their screws from China for their component parts. It's not just 1 or 2 screws. It's like 1,000 screws for their scooter. So they get it from China. And if you're going to add 10% for those screws to increase, all of a sudden you cut down on the profit margin. So what do? They're going to continue the business because they need to sell their scooter. So they're now looking at Mexico to see whether they can source those screws from Mexico. But you can't just buy screws. You can't just go there. It's like, hey, I want 3 billion screws from you. What are you going to do? So the company needs to basically measure it, create the mold for it, make sure everything is ready to go, get the steel, the aluminum, whatever, the metal parts that you need, and then you have to do the entire supply chain, which will take 3 months. Meanwhile, what do you do with the screws that you don't have? Do you stop production? Those are the questions I have about the trade policy that's happening right now with the administration. I understand that you want a better trade deal. We all do want a better trade deal. I don't know what that means. But meanwhile, who's going to suffer? For us, at the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, LAX, the #1 customs district, who's dependent on international trade, if there's a slowdown in the market, in manufacturing and the orders and stuff like that, LA will be hit hardest, I think, when it comes to import-export jobs, right? And then the second is we're the #1 manufacturing center. So if you're making a product and you're selling the product for $100, and now you're telling them it's $130 over the holiday season, maybe the consumer will like, it's a bit too expensive. I'm just going to wait for the price to drop in January. And now you have an excess of inventory. Retailers, as you know probably right now, it's just-in-time shipment, right? So they order it so that they can get it to the stores and sell it so they don't have to keep it. If they're going to have to keep it, then they have to basically increase the warehouse and distribution, the money they pay to store the goods. And so with that, they have an excess inventory. My guess is that they're not going to order as much in January, February, which means this, the volume of trade between China and the United States will go down, which means the shipping rate will now spike. Adding to that $130, now it's $140, further suppressing the consumer demand. So I think my humble opinion is that it might not affect us immediately, but as time goes on, you're going to see the price increase, and maybe the consumers are just not interested in buying the same product for $150 and when they could buy it for $100. So this is the part where I told a couple of folks earlier, I'm a bit of a worry bug, so I worry about a lot of different things. I'm hoping that I'm completely wrong, but this is the part where it becomes very complex. Import-export aside, I want to talk a bit about foreign direct investments. Foreign direct investment is a huge aspect of what we do here in my job to attract those investment dollars coming into Los Angeles. So if you look at downtown Los Angeles and across the entire region, recently we've been seeing an influx of capital coming from Asia, specifically from China. If you look at downtown Los Angeles, if you look at where the Staples Center is, right next to it, you have the Shanghai Greenland project, $1.2 billion investment in the Metropolis project. So it's residential and hotel. Across the street from that, you have Shenzhen Hazen, $700 million with their W Hotel that they'll be building. Down the street from that, you have Beijing Oceanwide with $1.3 billion. And then closer to the center of downtown, which is a bit further away, a whole whopping half a mile away, you have the Wilshire Grand Hotel invested by Korean Air for $1.3 billion. So you're talking about $5 billion in a matter of 2-3 years in a radius of a 1.5-mile radius. Those are the Asian investment that's coming in. Because of the capital flow restriction that President Xi Jinping from China issued about a year and a half ago, we basically stopped seeing the investment coming in from real estate, hotel projects, and entertainment projects. And don't forget, Wanda Entertainment came in and paid $3.5 billion for Legendary Pictures. And they bought AMC, the entire chain, by the way. So these are the effect that we're seeing in terms of the slowdown. That's going to compound what we're going to have to deal with next year. The good thing is, because China's stepping back, we see a lot of other nations stepping up. Japan is investing. Canada is investing. And this is where I have to be sensitive because I'm on camera. The region and the area of Taiwan, Taipei is investing. So there's a lot of sensitivity that we're feeling right now. So with all that said, some of the questions that were raised before, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping I'm completely wrong. Some other economists I've been talking to, they're very positive. They think everything is going to go on. The scooter manufacturer thinks their business is going to be completely fine because they're creating a brand new solution when it comes to electric scooters. So they can add another 25 cents or another $3 or $15, and you guys will buy it right up because it's so hot and it's so cool. But are you going to pay extra for that washing machine that you know that you can get from LG or Samsung? It doesn't matter which brand, it's going to be cheaper another way. So these are the things that I'm not quite sure how the trade policy is going to work. What I do know is that when it comes to international focus in terms of looking at us, our international partners are saying, well, if you don't want us, Canada does, Australia does. UK, they're going through a bit of a problem. Maybe we'll invest there, maybe we'll have a better return there. So we're not always going to be the hot item. So if you want to, like kind of what I said about Texas and other Illinois and Indiana, you have to compete. The United States has to compete. We have to establish this relationship. You could only slap your friends and your partner for so long before they're like, you know what, enough of you. So this is the part where I do feel like we're slapping them a bit too hard, a bit too long. I know that depending on where you stand, some of other folks might feel like we've been taken advantage of. But the thing is this, the US economy has been dominating the global economy for a while. We've been setting the rules. And all of a sudden to play victim, it's a bit hard for some nations to swallow. And that's the thing, it doesn't matter. They just basically are now looking at elsewhere. It's only a matter of time when we're gonna cede our place as the leader for the economy, which we're seeing in a couple of trade agreements. The Trans-Pacific Partnership we walked away from, and now they're moving forward without us. Can we get back in, and can we get the same deal? Transatlantic, the TTIP partnership with the European, with the Brexit happening, we missed the opportunity to really lock everything down. We don't quite know what's gonna happen. What's going to happen with Latin America and Mexico and Canada? USMCA, it's agreed upon, right? But the thing is, if anything changes next week, we have a different Congress. If they delay anything or they change anything, President Lopez Obrador might take office and basically said, you change the deal, I might walk away from it. At that point, all of a sudden the USMCA is gone. And then what? So these are all questions that I have no clue what's going to happen. We always say, may you live in an interesting time. We sure do. So. What public policies are best for the youth of America? I really think the public policy is engagement. All these programs that we have, sending our youth to go international, to understand the international context, and bringing back the best practices here, I think that's been a very positive model. And it's going to take a long time for us to get there again, but I think we still have a chance. So I'm still somewhat positive. I'm bit skeptical, a bit worried, but I think overall there might be a silver lining for all of us if we basically make sure that we're open, that LA leads the way in terms of international engagement, and show the world that we don't have to be protectionist. We can still work with folks and still push them to get to where we want to when it comes to trade policy. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Steve. So let me start with Ed. One aspect of this whole discussion which you did not mention and which has been sort of at the center of the conversation is the currency issue. So it's a two-part question. On the one hand, there is this tension that we've been living with in the US for so long, which is, will we label China officially as a currency manipulator? For you guys as students, there is a law, there is a statute in the US that says that if the Treasury labels a country a currency manipulator, in the sense that they use the currency to gain a competitive advantage, they manipulate the currency, then automatically we slap import tariffs on them. It's automatic. So every year the Treasury has to provide a report, and every year, this is not only with this administration, every year there is, will the Treasury label China as a currency manipulator? Then the Chinese yuan started strengthening, which the notion was that it was artificially too low, but lately it has been weakening again. So do you think, the two-part question, do you think that we should, or are the Chinese taking advantage of the currency? Should this be part of the trade wars, or is it a separate, parallel sort of issue? And related to that, what do you think is going to happen to the dollar if with respect to the euro and the yen and the other currencies, which are not manipulated, the sort of market-determined part of currency with the trade war?
That's a lot of detail.
Yeah, I know, but that's how we make the money, knowing the details.
Well, I think you agree with me that the real exchange rate is determined by investment and savings, that those countries that have lots of investment opportunities but don't have enough savings to fund the investments, they have to attract investments from external sources. And when those investors externally try to, say, come to the United States, they have to buy dollars, and they create an elevated real exchange rate. So the apparent elevation of the dollar relative to the yuan has to do with the fact that the Chinese country has high savings rates compared to investment rates, as is true of most of those Asian countries. And the United States has abysmally low savings given its demographic situation.
So but that means that the dollar should be weak if we have low savings.
No, it's strong because you have to have people buying your currency in order to invest in your country. It was a new thing in the LA Times yesterday about how the Chinese could create a war on us, was to prevent their tourists from coming to the United States. And they spend billions of dollars here. That's one thing of great concern, but the other one is that they're holding huge amounts of US Treasuries. And if they decide to unload those, the United States is going to have a terrible currency crisis and a sharply elevated interest rates, and we're going to have a really serious economic downturn. I look at, one of the things we do in forecasting is worry about when the next downturn is going to come. Historically, that's come from the housing sector in the United States. So far, the housing situation is really not overbuilt. It doesn't seem like it's going to drive us into the next downturn. So you look around and think, where might the next downturn come from? I do think it has to do with the global bond market, the big risk global bond market and currency devaluation. If the global investors start to think Uncle Sam is not going to pay us back, that doesn't mean they're default or delinquency, but the higher inflation is a way of not paying back all the debts that we have externally, and they're not going to like the Treasuries when that's starting to occur. So I think that the currency manipulation issue is back in the back of the theater, on the stage, and not really at the center, at the front. The front is savings and investment, as I see it. And the United States has a low savings rates that creates this external imbalance. But the worst part of it is the young people are having their future mortgaged by increasing the indebtedness to foreign citizens.
Okay, let me move to Steve. I was fascinated by your story about the ports. I've been living here for a long time, and I thought that San Pedro and Long Beach were the same thing. No, I'm kidding.
Most people do, and they say San Pedro instead of San Pedro.
Yeah. But let me ask you the following question. So the concern of the administration is, as Professor Ed said, manufacturing jobs. Okay, so this is where Donald Trump starts his story, and he says the manufacturing sector has been hit very hard, and these jobs are being lost, blah, 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 blah. And there is a sort of a discussion, or there has been among economists, is the manufacturing problem the result of trade or technology? And Ed suggested it was mostly technology. I think that that's what you said. Now, the answer, as with almost every question, is that it's all of the above. I mean, that's it may be more. So tell me about the technology aspect of these ports. What about robots?
Yeah.
So how far are the ports into using robots, and what do you predict? How many jobs do you predict are going to be lost at the ports? Or you can answer for logistics. You said there were 532,000 jobs in the logistics sector in
Trade logistics
in Los Angeles area. How many? We're going to have driverless trucks.
Yeah, it's already
happening. And we're going to have robots in the ports. I mean, what's it? So McKinsey says 1/2 of all jobs are going to be lost. Is this going to be particularly susceptible to robots?
Yes, and it's already in contention right now. So full disclosures, I actually used to work at the Port of Los Angeles. So I know a bit too much about the detail. So basically right now, you have to look at the whole operation.
Nice talks, by the way.
Oh, thank you. You too. So when you think about logistics sector, when you goods movement, let's talk about the ships that are coming in with the boxes. You have these gigantic ships that are now up to 21,000 TEUs, 21,000 20-foot equivalent boxes. And when you have these, probably about, let's say 10, 20,000 boxes that are on the ship, you have to unload them. So you have what we call the longshoremen, the union workers at the ports, to be able to use the cranes, grab the boxes, put them onto trucks, and the trucks will basically bring them to a local area, the backland, where they drop off the boxes. And you have to have cargo handling equipment, taking them, stacking them up. And then later on, you're going to have another truck that comes in where they unload it on the truck, and the truck will take it to a warehouse space, or they take it to a train. Because if they're going to Chicago, you want to line up about 200 of these boxes so they can go to Chicago. Rule of thumb is anything over 500 miles that you want to export, you want to use rail. Anything under that, you want to use a truck. It's just a economy of scale kind of thing. So if you're going to be trucking, you will be trucking to, say, Utah and San Francisco and such. And then if you want to go to Chicago or New York, then you want to rail it, right? So all of these are now, traditionally, have been handled by drivers and longshoremen, which is a huge issue when the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach decided to receive foreign investments to automate the terminals. So TraPac, which is a Japanese investment, got in about $250 million investment from Brookfield from Canada to do the first semi-automated terminal. It's because they couldn't get the agreement from the labor union to allow them to fully automate. Meanwhile, the Port of Long Beach, OOCL, which is a Hong Kong-based company that's now being bought out by Costco, a Chinese shipping company, they decided to automate the entire terminal, Middle Harbor, a $2 billion project. When I say automation, that means that basically you have the ability to, and it's happening in China and Asia already, where everything is controlled by robots and by sensors. So they can grab the box, put it on the automated truck, and the automated truck will go to a destination, and you don't have to worry about any of the safety issues. But you're talking about tens of thousands of union jobs that on average are right now paying about $130,000 a job. And these are...
So we may save a few jobs by slapping tariffs, but we're going to lose a whole bunch through the robots.
For automation. And that's what everybody's fearing. And the unions are now basically saying, hey, if we're going to lose these jobs, can we basically turn them into maintenance jobs to maintain the robots, to program? So there's a pushback to even adopt these technologies. So yeah, when it comes to automation is a huge threat. Robotics automation and sensors and autonomous vehicles will replace a lot of the jobs that are here.
So let me turn to Ed. So Peter Navarro, who is the czar of trade protectionism at the White House. Do you think that Mr. Navarro understands that while he may create 2,000 jobs by the tariffs, there are going to be thousands, as Stephen says, of jobs lost by technology? Do you think that the White House understands this? That it's a lost war, as you were predicting?
I think not. You know, what can I say? Now, there's not a respectable economist in the world who supports these trade tariffs, the Trump tariffs. The only possible idea is this is some kind of a bargaining position and that things are going to end up in some great place. But the trade, the disruption and the uncertainty and the damage that it does to the global supply chains is just unconscionable, really. Yeah. I don't think Peter Navarro has thought this thing out very effectively.
Okay, let me, before eating, Steve, you want to add something?
I wanted to say, that's the thing that scares a lot of folks the most. You know, if this is indeed a tactic and not a policy, and you're basically using this as a way to get China to the negotiation table, the collateral damage is LA. That's what I fear the most.
Yeah, but we are a blue state.
That's exactly it.
So they don't care about us. Let me open up, before dinner, let me see if there are a couple of questions from the students.
You mentioned, I think your last question was, is our democracy dying or something, and it was a kind of a very pessimistic answer you gave at the end. You think it's dying. So it's been over 100 years since we've had over 50% participation rate in our midterm elections. And I predict that that drought will end next week. And basically the idea of a democracy is a population participation representative government. How can you assert that our democracy is dying when we're about to have such vast participation in our own government?
I would think that participation is a symptom of the death of democracy. You're going to have unusual leaders, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, are going to win the votes to become our presidents. The other side is going to get annoyed, and it's going to go back and forth this way. But the fundamental problem is income inequality. And you're going to have, it seems to me, the Democrats may win. I'm totally in support of this idea. I'm against Trump, but I really worry if the Democrats take over. Neither party is sensibly concerned about the deficit. And trust me, the deficit's on your balance sheet, and nobody's concerned about that. I gave money to one of the women that was running in Michigan, and I got an email from her. I looked at her website. On the website, she's totally opposed to raising the age for Social Security. Social Security and Medicare are the big problems. Raising the age a little bit for retirement is an easy fix. Medicare is a horrible problem. How are you going to fund that $100 trillion worth of unfunded liabilities? And neither party is willing to do it, Democrats or Republicans.
Thank you for the information today. My name is Pradnya Prulakar, and I'm in the EMBA program, EMBA 2020. So my question really is for Stephen about the job creation. So I'm in the manufacturing sector, and I actually come from Michigan, where it was all manufacturing. And so when I came to LA County, lived in Ventura County, we have a manufacturing firm. While we have jobs, it's really hard to attract talent because of the cost of living here. Yeah. So, an engineering manager of the certain experience in, let's say, Ohio, Michigan, he'd get by with like 120 grand, has a house, has a second house, has good schools. And so you can't pay someone 300 grand in California just so they can afford a house. So I guess as you're going around and pitching to other companies to come and invest, what kind of programs or political leverage can you put on so that we can afford and attract this talent, but yet they'll want to be here because they can afford to be here?
Yeah. I don't think anybody would disagree with you that the housing costs and the cost of living in California, and especially Northern California, but now Southern California is catching up very quickly. It's become unattainable. And second of all, it's creating an income divide that's creating one of the worst issues that we're facing as a region, which is LA. I mentioned many great things about LA. We're the number one in this, number one in that. We're also the number one in homelessness. We have over 50,000 homeless individuals in LA County any given day right now. And that's an underestimate. So there's no question that that's a huge issue that we need to address, and we have not even begun to address it. We want to. Through previous ballot initiatives, Measure HHH, for example, there's $1 billion allocated to resolve the homeless issue. $1 billion for 50,000 people with chronic homeless issue and majors, that's not even a drop in the bucket. So there needs to be structural changes that's not in place right now. So no, this is this is the reason why I mentioned to some of the other folks, we're losing business. Toyota is leaving us for Plano, Texas. 4,000 jobs will be leaving this region. And that's not the first time it's happened, because Nissan left us 8 years before that. for Tennessee, and now Honda potentially be going to Ohio. So there's no easy answer, and it's not just one elected official, it's an entire system that needs to change to understand that when the cost of living is so high that we can't retain, the other issue is this. Even though it's hard and some of these manufacturing plants are leaving, as a whole, we're attracting enough that California is now the 5th largest economy, that we're the 15th largest economy in LA. A lot of folks are saying, we're fine. So this is a symptom of how sometimes we're complacent we are. The World Trade Center Los Angeles focus on foreign direct investments, right? And we work with some of our other partners in the LA Chamber, LADC, blah, blah, blah. Do you know how many people serving the 10.2 million population in LA County are focused on attracting international trade? There's probably less than 20 of us. 20 of us for all of LA.
So you're very productive then.
We try to be leveraged, but this is the part where there's no answer. The answer is the folks in this room, and that's why I keep talking about this. This is an issue. We try to attract folks. We can tell the great story. We still have a great market, but it's not going to sustain itself forever. There's no solution. It's a dire situation. I still think there's a positive light to it, is because currently, the talent pool is still here when it comes to certain types of engineering, for example. But when it comes to the lower wage in terms of the training aspect, we don't have the folks that are able to fill the worker gap. And that's going to be an issue that the California government, hopefully the next governor, will be able to provide more resources. But that's something that we need to face, or else really quickly our economy is not going to be able to sustain.
Okay, I want to say a couple of things, which is with Donald Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," is really about bringing manufacturing jobs. Make it back like it was in the 60s when we had 30% of our workforce in manufacturing. That's never going to happen. So automation, for example, but also the product innovation is totally different in the second half of the 20th century than the first. So the notion that we should focus our policy energy on manufacturing, I believe, is misplaced. Yeah, we want to keep those jobs, but recognize that those jobs are going to be a small sliver of the population, and we've got a huge bunch of people that we need to find out how they're going to have meaningful, quality American lives. And first and foremost, that's education. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean remote learning, remote memory like it used to be. They have to become creative problem solvers, doing things that computers and artificial intelligence can't do. And too much of our education is still memorization and regurgitation. And that's not going to work in the 21st century. But I really think that there's a premium on natural talent like there didn't used to be. When we moved jobs out of the artisan shops and manufacturing onto the factory floor, we eliminated the skills. The skills were then embodied in either the equipment or the product. And it took a person a pretty short period of time before they were effective working on the factory floor. That was de-skilling of America, which is good because the equipment was extremely powerful. You got high productivity and you got high wages. But we're having a reskilling now where the few are doing the coding and designing new equipment, and they're the ones who are carrying away the lion's share of the output. So I think that although education should be the focus, we have to recognize that we're moving into another kind of world in which material success should not be the report card. That there's going to be unequal material success through no fault of our own, and we ought to be measuring each other by how many friends we have or how much we contribute to the community, rather than how big our home is and how many bottles of wine we have in our home.
Okay, so on that note, we're going to stop this part of the program.